This is now my third time recording this video. Hopefully it sticks. The first time, the recording just sucked. The second time, I apparently forgot to press record. This time, I've checked 3 times. Seems to be okay. Let's try this. As you can tell, it's a pretty cold day in June. I'm wearing flannel. I never thought I'd be wearing flannel in June. But then again, I never thought last year I would be drinking margaritas on my deck on Christmas afternoon. Anyways, my name is Warren Pulowski, and welcome to Drunk on Writing. Today, we're going to talk about the world before writing. The world before letters, before words, before even numbers, before Twitter, before social media, before novels, before books, before magazines, before the internet, obviously. That is the era of prehistory. We call it prehistory because we have no written records of it. It's obviously history because it happened, as we generally refer to it, it's history. But we call it prehistory because nobody knows what actually happened outside of some archaeological artifacts that we've been able to dig up. And what we have is kind of few and far between. And it doesn't go back that very far. Outside of some, fossil records, which can only tell us so much. But you know what it can't tell us? Is what life was like. What culture was like. What interactions were like. How we communicated on a day-to-day basis. I can guarantee it was a lot different than what we're used to seeing today. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In the history of writing. Episode 1. Before writing. So the first actual writing only appeared about 5,500 years ago. Homo sapien, what we would generally refer to as the more modern human, first came into being about 200,000 years ago. So actual history is just a blip in the worldwide record. Life started 8 billion years ago. That's billion with a B. Writing, 5,500 years. Completely not comparable at all. So however life happened, whether it was, some molecules coming in on a meteorite, whether it was some lightning striking a pocket of gas and creating organic matter, whether it was God saying, let it be so, it happened, and life evolved, and life moved on, and it started swimming, and it started crawling on land, and eventually, about 8 million years ago, what would become humans broke off from the common ancestor that we share with baboons, gorillas, chimps, and the like. And obviously, we continue to evolve from there, or else, we wouldn't be here. But the thing is, we really only evolved physically. Culturally, we were seemingly at a dead end. We went nowhere. Now, you can imagine our ancestors pretty much looked like that science poster that you saw back in high school. But 8 million years ago, our ancestors broke away. It wasn't until about 2.5 million years ago that we started using the most basic tools you could possibly imagine. Now, these were just rocks that our ancestors would hold in their hands, and they would have this little sharp edge. Think of a shale deposit when that breaks off, and you got that nice little sharp edge to it. They used that, and they would hold it in the palm of their hand, and they would strike, and they would use it to cut meat, to cut bone, to cut hide, to do all of their basic tasks. This was 2.5 million years ago that this started to happen. And I want to give you a clue about how slow cultural change actually occurred at this time. Because until 40,000 years ago, that exact same tool, or slight variations of it, was still being used. Nothing had changed in over 2 million years. Cultural change, do you have it, Think about today, where imagine what our culture was 5 years ago. You would be caught dead wearing the fashion from 5 years ago. Snapchat wasn't a thing 5 years ago. You go 5 years before that, we're looking at the age basically before social media, before Facebook. God, do you remember the age before Facebook? Go back 20 years. The millennium, the Y2K. Just look how much we have come in that short a span of time. And then do a comparison where they're still holding sharp rocks for about 2.5 million years. Now you might have this picture in your head of our ancestors going out and teaming up and hunting down mammoths, woolly mammoths. That was years away from here. What we were eating at this time was basically what you could gather: berries, fruits, maybe some vegetables, probably some small vertebrae. There was this one record of some of our ancestors getting really lucky and eating a whole herd of antelope that probably got driven off of a cliff, or maybe they drowned, something. And the fact that we know that is because they ate the whole herd. We're talking children, we're talking the males, the females, all the elderly, broken bones and all, and they consumed it. You gotta take it for granted. It's like that donut that they put on the edge of your desk, and you're like, well, I'm not gonna eat that. And then eventually, like, well, I gotta eat it because there's this part of you that wants to consume those calories, that wants to kind of prevent yourself from starving at some point. This is a whole built-in biology thing. You can look it up. But the essential problem that was facing our ancestors, the Cro-Magnon at the time, was a lack of innovation. Sure, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthals, all of them, they used fire. You know, they cooked their food. They used it for light at night. They used it for heat. They even buried their dead. We don't know, of course, if it was for religious reasons or if it was just kind of a sanitary thing. But they did it. They even took care of their elderly. Elderly because they're only 30 or 40 years old, even though they probably look like the oldest person on Earth right now. But they were still extremely primitive beings. They hadn't come anywhere. If we saw them today, walking down the street, they wouldn't have any idea what to do with their surroundings, and they would probably look like they were escaped from a zoo rather than somebody that maybe was just a lost tourist from the other side of the world. But then there was this abrupt change. In the archaeological record, we start to see finer pieces of rock, ones that were deliberately chipped and made sharper. We start to see tools made from bones. We start to see tools composed of multiple pieces, such as a spear, where we have a stone head and a wooden shaft. And you can throw it long distance. This is the first appearance of long distance weapons. We also start to see the beginnings of long distance trade, of long distance travel. There are these really cool things in Australia. They're called song lines. This is how people could travel great distances. They would compose and then recite songs about the landscape around them. So they would sing about this mountain over here, this cave over here, this ravine that they have to cross. And they would pass this information along completely orally. They were able to travel these magnificent distances and conduct trade. It was kind of like the Garmin of that day. Is Garmin still around? Google Maps. It was the Google Maps of that day. No, forget that. It was the Waze of that day. Yeah, I'm catching up with the times. But I just think it's one of the coolest things. Just imagine singing your way across the USA, right? We also start to see cave paintings. There was no art before this. Those ancient cave paintings that you see in Lascaux, in France, in Spain, that was from this time, about 40,000 years ago, 35 to 40,000 years ago. Not before that, but even cooler, I think, than the cave paintings, we start to see bas reliefs. We start to see necklaces and pendants. We even start to see sculptures and musical instruments. The beginnings of the flute. So this was a great leap. And it's something that had, as far as we can tell, never happened before that in all of history. And it really hasn't happened since, except for one time. And that was when writing was introduced. And this great leap may be attributable to something very similar. The introduction of fine control of spoken sounds. That's right. Language, speech had been introduced. And now, for our ancestors, the possibilities were suddenly endless. They could talk to each other. They could devise strategies. They could plan long term. They could share thoughts. Imagine what the world would be like today if we couldn't share our thoughts 140 characters at a time. They couldn't do it at all. The best that they had were, simple grunts, kind of like Tim the Toolman Taylor. But if there was, say, this great beast over there, and one hunter said, you know what, I think if we go that way and kind of pin him in, we can trap him in the corner, and then we can use a wedge formation and attack him. You couldn't say that. There was no way you could ever convey that. But now you could. You could tell that to somebody else. And so these social bonds started to form. These hunting parties started to form. People started to brainstorm for the very first time. They started developing new tools. They started developing new food storage solutions, long-term storage solutions. The now very close to modern human started to form societies, clans, tribes, and they were living longer, so they were able to pass this knowledge down. Think of us talking to our elderly now. They're there, their information may be 60, 70, 80 years old, but it's still relevant. It's still useful. This back then was more like me talking to an 8-year-old, maybe even younger than that, passing down my knowledge, my skills. So it's not as extreme as our elderly giving us information, but it's a great step into forming civilization, forming a history, albeit an oral one. Unfortunately, although we were evolving culturally, we are only human, and human nature, as we know today, doesn't really evolve. Along with our more advanced skills, a number of species actually died out and went extinct. They couldn't cope with us. We outsmarted them, we outgunned them, we found them way too tasty to still exist. And we also started, for the very first time, to hate each other. For the first time, we could talk to each other. We can get what you were thinking, you could understand what I was thinking. And warfare first appeared. There's this very aptly named Talheim death pit. It contains the bodies of 34 men, women, and children. And the thing is, about these bodies, they had a number of healed over wounds. And their final wounds, the ones that did them in, that led them to this pit, were completely not defensive. Were not defensive in the least. They were all shot down as they were running away. That's not a battle, that's a slaughter. It's the kind of thing we still see today, unfortunately. But it kind of goes to show you what prehistoric man was capable of. And this is 6,000 years BC. This is 8,000 years ago. Long before the pyramids, long before anything else that still is something that we can go visit today. Warfare had come, and it would never go away. But thankfully, as society settled, as some people learned to live in peace, as the hunter-gatherer lifestyle became prominent, and agriculture became prominent, and food storage got better, we started to settle down, and our societies got larger. We started to see things like chiefdoms and the like. And the need for something beyond oral history arose. The need for something more than oral claims and oral commitments came into play. And that's when we started to see the rise of something else. The next great leap. But that's a story for another day and another episode of the History of Writing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, comment on this video. And if you really liked it, please consider being a patron over at patreon.com/drunkonwriting. You can also follow me on Facebook at drunkonwriting or on Twitter at drunkonwriting. No G. Somebody already took the G. What are you going to do? That's it. Until next time. I hope you learned something. See you then.